"Stop!" The word cut through the morning air like a gunshot. Every head in Brewster turned to see Caleb Hart standing in the middle of the dusty street, his right hand wrapped in blood-soaked bandages, his eyes locked on the woman being taken away in chains. Edmund Price smiled. "This does not concern you, Mr. Hart." Caleb took 3 steps forward. "She is spoken for." The crowd went silent. Price's smile vanished, and Caleb Hart dropped to one knee in the dirt in front of the entire town that had condemned them both. "Eliza Ward," he said quietly, "will you marry me?" 3 months earlier. The train hissed to a stop at Brewster Station like a dying beast exhaling its final breath. Steam billowed across the wooden platform, turning the late afternoon sun into fragments of gold filtering through morning fog. Eliza Ward stepped down onto the rough planks, her worn leather boots making a sound that seemed too loud in the expectant silence. She carried everything she owned in a single carpet bag, the fabric so faded that its original color had long since surrendered to the dust of countless journeys. In her gloved hand, she held a letter. The paper had been folded and unfolded so many times during the 6-day journey from Philadelphia that the creases had begun to tear at the edges. The ink was slightly smudged from the sweat of her palm from the time she had clutched it like a lifeline when doubt threatened to drown her resolve. The year was 1895, and Wyoming Territory was as unforgiving as the men who tried to tame it. Brewster was a town that existed because the railroad needed a place to take on water and coal, because ranchers needed somewhere to ship cattle, because lonely men needed somewhere to buy whiskey and forget how far they were from anywhere that mattered. It was a collection of wooden buildings that looked temporary even though some had stood for 20 years. The hotel needed paint. The mercantile needed new steps. The church needed a steeple. Everything in Brewster needed something it would probably never get. Eliza was 32 years old, a widow, a woman with no family, no fortune, and no future in a city that had already decided she was past her prime. Philadelphia had been kind to her once when she was young and her husband was alive, and the world seemed full of possibilities. But her husband had died in a factory accident 6 months after their wedding, crushed beneath machinery that should have been repaired years before. The company paid her $50 and told her she was lucky to get that much. She had worked ever since taking any job that would have her watching the years slip past like water through her fingers. The letter had arrived 4 months ago, forwarded through a matrimonial service she had contacted in a moment of desperation. It was written in careful script, measured and honest, in a way that made her want to believe every word. "I am not a romantic man," it began, "but I am a decent one. I have land, a home, and a son who needs steadiness. If you are a woman of character who seeks the same, I would be honored to meet you." It was signed Caleb Hart. She had written back 3 times before receiving confirmation. Arrangements were made. A train ticket arrived with a short note that said only August 15th, Brewster Station. I will be there. And now she stood on that platform scanning the crowd for a man she had never seen holding a letter that felt heavier with each passing second. Caleb Hart stood near the station house, his hat in his hands. He was tall and lean, weathered by sun and work despite being only in his mid-30s. His face was carved from granite, all hard angles and deep lines that made him look older than his 35 years. His shirt was clean but faded, his boots scuffed from years of use. He looked like a man who had forgotten how to smile, or perhaps had simply decided that smiling was a waste of energy better spent elsewhere. Eliza approached slowly, her carpetbag suddenly feeling much heavier than it had any right to be. Her dress was wrinkled from days of travel, her hair pinned but loose at the edges, her hands trembling in a way she hated but could not control. "Mr. Hart," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Around them the platform had gone quiet. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. In a town this small spectacle was rare, and the arrival of a mail-order bride was the kind of event people would talk about for months. "Ma'am," he said. His voice was flat, but there was something underneath it. Confusion, maybe, or anger held in check by force of will. "I am Eliza Ward." She offered the letter, extending it toward him like evidence in a trial. "I believe we have been corresponding." He did not take it. He did not move at all. His eyes, a pale blue that looked almost gray in the afternoon light, fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "I did not write that letter," Caleb said. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the platform with perfect clarity. Every person within 50 feet heard him. Every person stopped pretending not to listen. The words hit Eliza like a physical blow. She felt the blood drain from her face, felt her hands go cold despite the August heat. She had expected many things. Disappointment, perhaps, if she did not meet his expectations. Awkwardness, certainly, as two strangers tried to navigate the beginning of a life together. But she had not expected this, had not expected to be denied before she had even been acknowledged. "I see," she said. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, and she hated herself for it. Around them the platform seemed to hold its breath. Brennan, the wife of the wealthiest rancher in the territory, stood near the station house with two other women. She wore a blue dress that was far too fine for a train platform, and her face held an expression of satisfaction that made Eliza's stomach turn. This was what she had come to see. This was what she had hoped for. The humiliation of an outsider. The failure of someone who had dared to reach for something beyond her station. "I am sorry you came all this way," Caleb said. He put his hat back on, pulling the brim low. "I will pay for your return ticket. It is the least I can do." It was a kind offer, a gentleman's offer, and it made Eliza feel like a fool, like a desperate woman who had thrown herself at a stranger based on words he had never written, promises he had never made. She nodded once, not trusting herself to speak. The carpet bag felt impossibly heavy now, weighted down with the collapse of every hope she had carried across 1,000 miles of track. "That will not be necessary," she managed to say. "I can manage myself." "It is necessary," Caleb said. His tone was firm, final. "This is not your fault." "No," she agreed, finding her voice somewhere beneath the humiliation. "But it is not yours either." Before either of them could say more, a small voice cut through the tension like a knife through fabric. "Pa, wait." A boy stepped forward from behind Caleb's leg. He was small, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with dark hair that stuck up in the back, despite obvious attempts to smooth it down. He wore patched trousers and a shirt that had been mended more than once, the careful stitches visible even from a distance. His eyes were too old for his face, the kind of eyes that belonged to someone who had seen more than any child should have to see. Caleb's expression shifted. Just a fraction, but enough that Eliza could see something crack in the stone facade. "Noah," he said quietly. "Go wait by the wagon." "No, Pa." The boy's voice was quiet but steady. He looked at Eliza, then back at his father, and there was something in his face that made Eliza's chest tighten. Determination, fear, the terrible courage of a child who knows he is about to confess to something unforgivable. "I wrote it," Noah said. The platform went so still that Eliza could hear the wind moving through the dry grass beyond the tracks, could hear a horse stamping its feet somewhere in the distance, could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Caleb stared down at his son. His face had gone completely blank, the way a man's face goes blank when he is trying very hard not to feel anything at all. "What?" he said. "I wrote the letter." Noah's hands were clenched at his side so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. "I found the matrimonial paper in the mercantile. I copied your name. I thought—" His voice broke and he swallowed hard, visibly fighting tears. "I thought maybe if someone came you would stop being so sad." Eliza felt something crack open in her chest. She looked at this small boy who had done something desperate and brave and utterly foolish, and she understood him completely. Understood the kind of loneliness that makes you do things that make no sense to anyone but yourself. Understood the kind of love that drives you to actions you cannot defend but cannot regret. Caleb crouched down slowly, his movements careful and controlled. He brought himself level with Noah's face, and when he spoke his voice was low enough that only those closest could hear. "You forged my name," he said. "Yes, sir. You invited a stranger here under false pretenses." "Yes, sir." "Do you understand what you have done?" Caleb's voice was not angry. It was something worse than angry. It was hollow, empty. The voice of a man who has just discovered that the one person he thought he could trust has betrayed him in a way he cannot comprehend. "Yes, sir." "Do you understand what this costs her?" Caleb gestured toward Eliza without looking at her. "She traveled 6 days. She gave up whatever life she had. She came here because she believed a lie you told." Noah's eyes filled with tears, but he did not look away. "Yes, sir." Caleb stood slowly. He looked at Eliza for the first time since Noah's confession, and she saw past the stone for just a moment, saw exhaustion, saw grief, saw a man who was barely holding himself together, who had been barely holding himself together for longer than anyone should have to. "I will pay for your ticket," he said again, "and your lodging tonight. The hotel is clean. You can leave tomorrow on the morning train." Eliza could feel the town watching, could feel their judgment, their pity, their satisfaction at seeing an outsider brought low. She could leave, should leave. The smart thing, the sensible thing would be to take the man's money and get back on the train and forget this place had ever existed. But she looked at Noah standing there with tears on his face and hope dying in his eyes, and she made a choice that had nothing to do with sense or safety. "I would like to stay," she said. Caleb blinked. It was the first time his expression had shown anything like surprise. "Ma'am, just for a few days." She kept her voice calm, even though her heart was racing. "I have come a long way. I would like to see the town before I go back." "There is nothing to see." "Then it will not take long." A woman stepped forward from the crowd. Mrs. Brennan Eliza realized, though they had not been introduced. Middle-aged, sharp-eyed, with the kind of face that suggested she had been beautiful once and resented the years for taking that beauty away. She carried herself with the authority of someone who was used to being obeyed, used to having her opinions treated as facts. "Caleb Hart," she said, her voice carrying the bite of frost in November. "You cannot let a single woman stay in this town without a chaperone. It is not decent." "I will stay at the hotel, Mrs. Brennan," Eliza said smoothly. "I am quite capable of managing myself." "That is not the point." Mrs. Brennan's gaze was cold enough to freeze water. "You came here under false pretenses. The boy may have written the letter, but that does not change what it looks like." "It looks," Eliza said quietly, meeting the woman's eyes without flinching, "like a child who misses his mother." The words landed like a slap. Mrs. Brennan's mouth thinned into a hard line. The crowd shifted uncomfortable. Someone coughed. Someone else turned away, suddenly very interested in something happening down the street. Caleb's voice was rough when he spoke. "My wife has been gone 3 years. That has nothing to do with this." "Does it not?" Eliza looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the truth written in every line of his face. "Your son wrote to a stranger because he did not know what else to do, because he is 8 years old and he is trying to take care of you when it should be the other way around. That tells me everything I need to know." "You do not know anything about us," Caleb said. "No," she agreed. "But I know what it is like to be desperate enough to take a chance on a piece of paper." Silence fell again, heavier this time. Eliza was aware of how many people were watching, how many would carry this story through the town like wildfire through dry grass. But she was also aware of Noah standing between them like a bridge neither adult wanted to cross. The boy stepped forward again, placing himself directly between Eliza and the crowd. His small shoulders were squared, his chin lifted in defiance that would have been admirable if it were not so heartbreaking. "She stays," he said. His voice was thin but determined, the voice of a child pretending to be a man. "I wrote the letter. I asked her to come. She stays." Caleb closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something had changed. Some last wall of resistance had crumbled, leaving behind only exhaustion and a kind of resignation that looked like defeat. "All right," he said finally. He looked at Eliza and his voice was flat again, all emotion carefully locked away. "You can stay at the house. There is a spare room. It is small, but it is private." Mrs. Brennan made a noise of protest, but Caleb cut her off with a look that could have stripped paint. "She is not staying at the hotel where every traveler and drifter can bother her," he said. His tone made it clear that the discussion was over. "She will stay with us. Noah asked her here. I will see it through." He turned and walked toward a wagon hitched near the station house. Noah looked up at Eliza with something like awe, like she had just performed a miracle he had not dared to hope for. Then he hurried after his father, his small legs working double time to keep up. Eliza stood alone on the platform, her carpetbag in her hand, and realized she had just agreed to live in the house of a man who did not want her in a town that already despised her because a lonely child had written a letter in secret. She picked up her bag and followed them to the wagon. The wagon ride was silent. Caleb sat in the front, his hands loose on the reins, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Noah sat between them, small and quiet, occasionally glancing at Eliza as if to reassure himself that she was still there, that she had not disappeared like morning mist. The Hart Ranch sat 5 miles outside Brewster, tucked into a valley where the land rolled in long, dry waves. The house was small, 2 stories built from rough-cut timber that had weathered to a pale gray. The porch sagged slightly on one side, suggesting that repairs had been delayed or forgotten. The barn was larger than the house, better maintained, with neat fences stretching out in lines that spoke of order and discipline. A few horses grazed in a corral near a water trough. Chickens scratched in the dirt near what looked like a vegetable garden, though most of the plants had gone to seed or died from lack of attention. It was quiet, painfully quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from too few people living in too much space. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down without a word. Noah scrambled after him, grabbing Eliza's carpetbag before she could protest. "I will show you the room," the boy said quickly, his eagerness breaking through the tension like sun through clouds. Eliza followed him inside. The house was clean but sparse in a way that suggested a man living alone with a child, doing the minimum necessary to keep things functional. The kitchen held a wood stove and a scarred table with 2 chairs. The sitting room contained 2 more chairs and a cold fireplace. The stairs creaked. Every surface was dust-free, but there was no warmth here, no softness, no sign that this house had ever been a home rather than just a shelter. Upstairs, Noah opened a door to a small room that looked out over the valley. A narrow bed stood against one wall covered with a quilt that had been carefully made but showed its age. A washstand held a basin and pitcher. A single window let in the late afternoon light, painting everything gold. "It was Ma's sewing room," Noah said quietly. "Pa cleaned it out last year." Eliza set her bag on the bed. "It is perfect, thank you." Noah hesitated in the doorway, suddenly uncertain. "Are you really going to stay?" "For a little while," Eliza said carefully. She did not want to lie to him, but she also did not want to make promises she could not keep. "Why?" She turned to look at him. He was so small, so serious, too young to carry the weight she could see in his eyes. "Because I think you were brave to write that letter," she said, "and I think you deserve better than watching me leave before we have even talked." His eyes filled with tears again, but he smiled. Just a little, just enough. "Pa is going to be mad for a long time." "I expect so." "He is not mean," Noah said quickly, defensively. "He is just sad." "I know." The boy nodded as if her understanding was important to him. Then he left his footsteps light on the stairs. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed and looked out the window at the endless sky. She had left Philadelphia with nothing, had come here expecting a new life, a partnership, maybe even a kind of peace. Instead, she had found a man made of stone and a boy made of hope. She did not know what would come next, but she was not leaving yet. Dinner was silent in a different way than the wagon ride had been. This silence was heavier weighted down by the presence of 3 people in a space meant for 2. Caleb cooked beans and cornbread and coffee strong enough to strip paint from wood. He set plates on the table without looking at her, his movements efficient and distant, the actions of a man performing a duty he resented but would not shirk. Noah sat between them, glancing nervously from one adult to the other, clearly hoping someone would say something, anything to break the terrible quiet. Eliza ate without comment. The food was plain but good, better than she had expected. When she finished, she folded her napkin carefully and cleared her throat. "Thank you for the meal," she said. Caleb nodded once. That was all. Noah, desperate to fill the silence, piped up. "Pa is a good cook. He learned from Ma." Noah. Caleb's voice was quiet but firm, carrying a warning the boy clearly recognized. Noah fell silent, shrinking slightly in his chair. Eliza stood and began gathering the dishes. "May I help with the washing up?" "No need," Caleb said. "I would like to." For the first time since they had left the station, he looked at her directly. "You are a guest." "I am not a guest," Eliza said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I am a woman who showed up uninvited because your son forged a letter. The least I can do is wash a plate." His jaw tightened, but he did not argue. They worked in silence, Eliza washing Caleb, drying Noah, putting things away in cabinets he could barely reach. It was strange and awkward, and somehow almost normal, like a photograph of a family that did not quite exist. When the last dish was put away, Caleb sent Noah upstairs to bed. The boy went reluctantly, looking back at Eliza as if afraid she would disappear the moment he was out of sight. Once they were alone, Caleb leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. The lamplight threw shadows across his face, making him look older, harder. "You cannot stay long," he said. "I know. People will talk." "They already are." He studied her, his expression unreadable. "Why did you really come here?" Eliza met his gaze without flinching. "Because I had nowhere else to go. There is always somewhere else. Not for a woman my age with no money and no family." She kept her voice level, refusing to let him see how much the truth cost her to speak. "I answered your letter, Noah's letter, because it was honest, or I thought it was. I did not come here looking for romance, Mr. Hart. I came looking for a chance." "At what?" "At a life that is not about surviving day to day, at work that matters, at a place where I am needed." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your son needed someone. That is why he wrote. Maybe you do not want to admit it, but it is true." Caleb's expression did not change, but something shifted in his eyes. Something that looked almost like pain. "My son is my responsibility." "Yes," Eliza said, "and he is trying to take care of you. Do you not see that he is 8 years old and he is shouldering a burden that no child should have to carry? You do not know what you are talking about." "Maybe not," Eliza said quietly, "but I know what loneliness looks like. I know what it is like to wake up every morning and wonder if this is all there is, if this is all there will ever be. And I know what it is like to be so desperate for something different that you do something that makes no sense to anyone but yourself." Caleb turned away, gripping the edge of the counter hard enough that his knuckles went white. His shoulders were tight, his breathing controlled. "You do not know what you are asking." "I am not asking for anything," Eliza said. "I am just telling you what I see. A man who is drowning, a boy who is watching his father drown and does not know how to save him, and a stranger who might be able to help if you would let her." He did not respond, did not turn around, just stood there, his back to her, fighting some battle she could not see. After a long moment, Eliza left him there and climbed the stairs to the small room with the window that looked out over the valley. She undressed slowly, washed her face in the basin, and lay down on the narrow bed. The quilt smelled faintly of lavender and dust, like something that had been put away for a long time and only recently brought back out. Outside, the wind moved through the grass like a whisper, and in the silence of the house she heard the faint sound of footsteps downstairs, back and forth, back and forth. The sound of a man pacing, unable to sleep, unable to rest, unable to do anything but walk and think and try to make sense of a situation that made no sense at all. Eliza closed her eyes and listened to those footsteps until long after midnight, when exhaustion finally pulled her under into fitful sleep. She woke to the sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of coffee drifting up from the kitchen below. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory returned, bringing with it the weight of yesterday and the uncertainty of today. She dressed quickly, pinning her hair with practiced efficiency, and came downstairs to find Caleb already gone and Noah sitting at the table with a bowl of oatmeal. "Morning," the boy said brightly, as if yesterday had never happened. "Good morning," Eliza said. She poured herself coffee from the pot on the stove, grateful for something to do with her hands. "Where is your father?" "Out with the horses. He is always up before the sun." Noah stirred his oatmeal without eating it. "Do you go to school?" He shook his head. "There is no school close enough. Pa teaches me reading and numbers at night." "Do you like it?" "It is all right." He looked up at her shyly. "I like stories better than numbers." "What kind of stories?" "Adventures, cowboys and outlaws and such." He paused, then added quietly, "Do you know any stories?" Eliza smiled her first real smile since arriving in Brewster. "A few." They talked while he ate about books and Philadelphia and the things he wanted to see someday. He was bright, curious, hungry for a world bigger than the one he knew. Eliza found herself relaxing, found the knot of tension in her chest loosening just slightly. When Caleb came back in, his sleeves rolled up and his hands dusty from work, he stopped short at the sight of them talking. His expression was unreadable, but Eliza thought she saw something flicker behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or something else she could not name. "Noah," he said, "go check the chicken coop." The boy's face fell, but he obeyed without argument. He set his bowl in the basin and headed for the door, casting one last glance back at Eliza before disappearing outside. Caleb poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter watching her. The silence stretched between them like a rope pulled tight. "You are good with him," he said finally. "He is easy to talk to." "He gets attached fast." Caleb's voice was flat, but there was warning in it. "I am not trying to hurt him." "I know." He took a drink of coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. "But you will anyway, when you leave." "Maybe," Eliza said. "Or maybe I will leave him better than I found him. That is not how it works. Is it not?" She stood setting her cup in the basin. "Your son wrote that letter because he is desperate for something you cannot give him. I do not know what that is yet, but I know that running from it will not fix anything." Caleb's expression darkened. "You have been here one day, and I have already seen more than you think. Then you should know this will not end well." "Maybe," Eliza said quietly, holding his gaze, "but I am still here." She walked past him, out into the morning sun, leaving him alone with his coffee and his silence. And for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Hart found himself wondering if maybe, just maybe, he had been wrong about something. About everything. The days fell into a rhythm that nobody had planned, but everyone seemed to accept. Eliza rose early before the sun had fully cleared the eastern horizon and made breakfast while Caleb worked through the morning chores. She sat with Noah while he practiced his letters, correcting his grip on the pencil and praising him when he got a difficult word right. She mended clothes without being asked, swept floors that did not necessarily need sweeping, and kept herself busy in ways that made her presence useful rather than intrusive. Caleb said little. He worked from dawn until well past dusk, came in for meals, and retreated into silence like a man seeking shelter from a storm. But he watched her when he thought she was not looking careful, assessing glances that told her he was waiting for something to break, for some proof that his initial judgment had been correct. On the 4th morning, Eliza found Noah in the barn, struggling to lift a saddle onto a fence rail. The leather was heavy, meant for a full-grown man, and the boy's arms trembled with the effort. "Here," Eliza said, taking one side. Together they hoisted it up, settling it onto the worn wood. Noah grinned at her, slightly breathless. "Thanks. Pa says I have to be able to do it myself, but it is heavy." "It is," Eliza agreed. "But there is no shame in asking for help. Pa never asks for help. I have noticed." The boy leaned against the rail, watching her with those 2 old eyes. "Do you like it here?" Eliza considered the question. The land was harsh, the work endless, the silence heavy. But there was something about the valley, about the way the light moved across the hills, about the smell of sage and dust, about the bigness of the sky that made her feel like she could breathe for the first time in years. "I do," she said honestly, "even though Pa is so quiet, especially because of that." She brushed straw from her skirt. Quiet men usually have the most to say. They just do not know how to say it yet. Noah frowned, thinking about this. "Pa used to talk more. Before Ma died. He taught me to fish, told me stories at night. He would laugh sometimes." The boy kicked at the dirt. "Now he just works." "What was she like?" Eliza asked gently. "Your mother?" Noah's face softened in a way that made Eliza's chest ache. "Pretty. She laughed a lot. She used to sing when she cooked." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I do not remember her voice anymore, just that she sang." Eliza felt her throat tighten. "I am sorry." "It is okay." But his eyes said it was not okay, would never be okay. She wanted to reach for him to offer comfort, but she did not know if she had that right. So she just stood there beside him, two people carrying losses they could not name, and let the silence hold them both. That evening, after Noah had gone to bed, Caleb sat on the porch alone. He pulled out a small photograph from his pocket, edges worn from handling. Sarah's face looked back at him, frozen in a moment of happiness he could barely remember. Her last words echoed in his mind, words he had tried to bury for 3 years. "Promise me, Caleb. Promise you will not let Noah grow up alone. He needs a family. He needs more than just you drowning in grief." He had promised, and he had broken that promise every day since. Caleb tucked the photograph away and looked out at the dark valley, feeling the weight of a vow he did not know how to keep. The next afternoon, Mrs. Brennan arrived. Eliza was hanging laundry when she heard the sound of a buggy rolling into the yard. She turned to see a well-appointed carriage pulled by a matched pair of grays, the kind of vehicle that cost more than most people made in a year. Mrs. Brennan climbed down without waiting for assistance, her dress perfectly pressed, despite the dust of the road, her face set in an expression that could have been carved from ice. "Miss Ward," she said. Her voice carried the kind of politeness that was more insulting than open hostility. "Mrs. Brennan?" Eliza pinned a sheet to the line, refusing to be hurried or intimidated. "What can I do for you? You can tell me what you are still doing here." Eliza reached for another sheet. "Mr. Hart offered me lodging. I accepted." "For how long?" "I have not decided." Mrs. Brennan's mouth thinned into a hard line. "This town has standards, Miss Ward. A single woman living under a widower's roof without a chaperone is improper. I am staying in a separate room. I help with the household. There is nothing improper about it." "That is not how it looks." Eliza turned to face her, fully setting down the laundry basket. "How it looks, Mrs. Brennan, depends entirely on what people choose to see. People see a woman who came here under false pretenses." Mrs. Brennan said, her voice sharp as a blade, "who took advantage of a child's foolishness and now refuses to leave. Is that what you see?" The woman hesitated just for a fraction of a second. "It does not matter what I see. It matters what the town thinks." "The town," Eliza said quietly, "seems to spend an awful lot of time thinking about other people's business instead of tending to their own. This is a small community. Reputation matters. Then perhaps the community should be more concerned with kindness than reputation." Eliza held the woman's gaze without flinching. "I know that a little boy lost his mother and did something desperate to help his father. I know that instead of compassion he got judgment. And I know that if this town cared half as much about that child as it does about gossip, we would not be having this conversation." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and clean as a knife cut. Mrs. Brennan opened her mouth, closed it, then turned on her heel and climbed back into her buggy. She snapped the reins harder than necessary, and the horses lurched forward, kicking up dust that settled slowly in the still air. Eliza watched her go, her hands shaking slightly. She turned back to the laundry and found Caleb standing near the corner of the house. He had come back from checking the fences without her hearing, and she had no idea how long he had been there, how much he had heard. "She is not wrong," he said. Eliza picked up another sheet. About which part? All of it. He walked closer, his boots crunching on the dry ground. People are talking. They think you are here to trap me into marriage. Are you worried I will? No. He said it with certainty, as if the idea were too absurd to even consider. But it does not matter what I think. It matters what they think. Why? Eliza pinned the sheet with more force than necessary. Why does it matter so much what strangers think about your life? Because I have to live here. Noah has to grow up here. If they decide we are improper, if they decide we have violated some rule they made up to make themselves feel righteous, then everything becomes harder. For him especially. Eliza turned to face him. Mr. Hart, I have been called worse things than improper. I have been called desperate, pathetic, past my prime, and a burden. I came here because I had nothing to lose. If staying here costs you something, tell me now, and I will leave. But do not ask me to leave because you are afraid of gossip. Caleb stared at her for a long moment. The afternoon sun threw shadows across his face, making it impossible to read his expression. You are not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? Someone softer. I was soft once, Eliza said quietly. It did not serve me well. He nodded slowly, as if that made perfect sense to him. Then he turned and walked back toward the barn without another word, leaving Eliza alone with the laundry and the endless sky and a feeling in her chest that she could not quite name. That night Noah asked Eliza to tell him a story. They sat on the porch as the sun set, painting the valley in shades of orange and purple. Caleb was inside reviewing accounts by lamplight, his head bent over a ledger, his expression concentrated. What kind of story? Eliza asked. A happy one, Noah said. She thought for a moment, then began. Once there was a girl who lived in a city made of stone and smoke. She had a small room in a tall building, and every day she looked out her window and wondered if there was a bigger world beyond the streets she knew. Noah leaned forward interested. What did she do? She saved every penny she earned, and when she had enough she bought a ticket on a train heading west. She did not know where she was going or what she would find. She just knew she could not stay where she was. Was she scared? Terrified, Eliza said. But she went anyway. What happened to her? Eliza smiled. She is still finding out. Noah grinned, catching the meaning. That is you. Maybe. Did you really not know Pa did not write the letter? I really did not. Are you mad at me? Eliza looked at him, at this small, brave boy who had taken a chance on a stranger because he did not know what else to do. No, Noah, I am not mad. But you did not get what you wanted. I did not get what I expected, she corrected. That is not the same thing. He thought about that for a moment. Do you think Pa will ever want you to stay? Really stay, I mean, not just for a few days. The question was so earnest, so full of hope, that it nearly broke her heart. I do not know, she said honestly. But wanting someone to stay and being ready for them to stay are two different things. What is the difference? One is a feeling, the other is a choice. Noah nodded as if that made perfect sense. They sat together in the gathering dark, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of Caleb's pen scratching across paper. The sky turned from purple to deep blue to black, and stars began to appear one by one, more stars than Eliza had ever seen in Philadelphia, where the smoke and the streetlights dimmed everything. Inside the house, Caleb set down his pen and rubbed his eyes. He had been staring at the same column of numbers for 20 minutes without really seeing them. His mind kept wandering to the conversation he had overheard between Eliza and Mrs. Brennan, kept returning to the way Eliza had stood her ground, the way she had defended Noah without hesitation, the way she had spoken about kindness mattering more than reputation. Sarah would have liked her, he thought, and the realization hit him like a fist to the chest. His wife would have liked this strange, stubborn woman who had appeared on a train platform with nothing but a carpetbag and the courage to stay when anyone with sense would have run. The thought hurt more than it should have. Felt like a betrayal, even though Sarah had been dead for 3 years. Felt like he was letting go of something he had sworn to hold on to forever. He stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to do something other than sit and think. He walked to the window and looked out at the porch where Noah and Eliza sat talking. He could not hear their words, but he could see the way his son leaned toward her, the way her hand rested gently on the boy's shoulder, the way they sat together in comfortable silence. Noah had not sat like that with anyone since Sarah died, had not talked like that, had not laughed like that. And Caleb, watching from the window, felt something crack inside him, some wall he had built to keep the world out, to keep the pain in, to keep everything exactly as it had been, because change meant accepting that Sarah was truly gone. He turned away from the window before they could see him watching, went back to his ledger, tried to focus on numbers that suddenly seemed completely meaningless. The trouble came 5 days later. Eliza was in town buying flour and sugar at the mercantile when she overheard 2 men talking near the counter. They did not bother to lower their voices either, because they did not care who heard or because they wanted her to hear. "Hart has got himself a live-in woman now," one of them said. His voice carried easily across the small store. "Guess he is not so particular after all." The other man laughed, a sound like gravel rolling in a bucket. "Cannot blame him. A man gets lonely. Lonely is one thing, but moving her in without a ring, that is something else entirely." Eliza set the flour on the counter and turned to face them. Both men went quiet, their faces flushing with embarrassment, or perhaps just with being caught. "Gentlemen," she said evenly, "if you have something to say about me, I would appreciate you saying it to my face." The first man, balding with a thick mustache that had gone gray at the edges, cleared his throat. "No offense meant, ma'am." But offense was given. Eliza did not raise her voice, but her tone could have cut glass. "I am staying at the Hart Ranch because a child asked me to. I work for my keep. I sleep in my own room. And what happens under that roof is nobody's business but ours." "People talk," the second man muttered, looking at his boots. "People always talk," Eliza said. "It is easier than thinking." She paid for her goods, collected her parcels, and walked out with her head high. But the damage was done. By the time she returned to the ranch, the story would have spread through town like fire through dry grass, growing with each telling until it bore no resemblance to the truth. When she arrived back at the ranch, Caleb was waiting for her in the yard. His face was tight, his posture rigid in a way that suggested barely controlled anger. "What happened in town?" he asked without preamble. She told him. He listened without interrupting, his jaw working as she recounted the conversation. When she finished, he turned away and stared out at the horizon, his hands clenched at his sides. "I am sorry," Eliza said quietly. "For what?" "For making this harder for you." "You did not make anything harder." His voice was rough, strained. "They were always going to talk. I just thought I could keep you separate from it, keep you away from their judgment." "You cannot," Eliza said. "Not in a town this small, not when you are trying to protect someone they have already decided to hate." Caleb turned back to her, his eyes dark with something she could not read. "Then maybe you should go." The words hit her like a physical blow. She forced herself to stay calm, to keep her voice level. "Is that what you want?" "It does not matter what I want." "It is the only thing that matters." "No." He shook his head, his frustration breaking through. "What matters is Noah. What matters is keeping him safe, keeping him from being the subject of gossip, keeping him from being ashamed." "Ashamed of what?" Eliza stepped closer. "Of you, of me, of all of it." "Of all of it." His voice cracked slightly, revealing the pain beneath the anger. "His mother is gone. His father is barely holding on. And now there is a strange woman living in our house because he forged a letter. What do you think that does to him?" "I think," Eliza said slowly, carefully, "it shows him that people can be kind even when the world is not fair. I think it shows him that mistakes do not have to ruin everything. And I think it shows him that his father is strong enough to choose what is right instead of what is easy." Caleb stared at her, his breathing uneven. "You do not know what you are asking." "I am not asking for anything." She held his gaze. "I am just telling you what I see. A man who is drowning in grief and pride. A boy who is trying to save him. and a choice that will define what kind of man that boy grows up to be. "I cannot do this," Caleb said. The words came out broken, defeated. "Cannot do what this, you, any of it." He gestured helplessly. "I do not know how." "Neither do I," Eliza said, "but I am still here." Before he could respond, Noah came running from the barn, his face pale with urgency. "Pa, there are men coming." Caleb's head snapped up. "How many?" "3, maybe 4, on horses, coming fast." Eliza felt her stomach drop. Caleb's expression went cold, controlled all emotion, carefully locked away. "Go inside," he told her. "What is happening? Just go." She did not move. Caleb looked at her, and for a moment something passed between them, some understanding or acknowledgement that this was the moment everything would change. The riders appeared over the hill, moving at a fast trot that kicked up dust in their wake. Caleb recognized them immediately. The one in front was Tom Brennan, husband of the woman who had confronted Eliza days earlier. Beside him rode 2 ranch hands from a neighboring spreadmen Caleb knew by sight, but not by name. The 4th man was someone Eliza did not recognize, someone who carried himself with an authority that suggested law, or at least the pretense of it. They pulled up hard in the yard, their horses snorting and stamping. Tom Brennan dismounted, his face set in an expression of grim satisfaction. He was a big man running to fat now, but still imposing with the kind of face that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. "Caleb," he said. "Tom." Caleb's voice was flat, giving nothing away. "We need to talk about your situation here." "My situation is my own business." "Not when it affects the town." Brennan gestured to the others. "We have got concerns about propriety, about example." "I am not setting any example," Caleb said evenly. "I am living my life. With an unmarried woman under your roof, with a guest who is doing no harm. That is not how people see it." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then people need to mind their own affairs." The 4th man spoke up, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "I am Marshal Coughlin. I have been asked to look into whether there has been any impropriety." Eliza felt her blood go cold. This was not just gossip anymore. This was the law, or what passed for law in a place where power and authority were often the same thing. "There has been nothing improper," Caleb said, but there was a warning in his voice now. "Then you will not mind if I ask the lady a few questions." "I mind," Caleb said, "but I will not stop you." Coughlin turned to Eliza. He was lean and weathered, with hard eyes and a badge pinned to his vest. "Ma'am, are you here of your own free will?" "I am." "And you are staying in Mr. Hart's home without any formal arrangement?" Eliza felt heat rise in her face, felt the weight of every eye on her. "I am staying in a guest room. I help with household work. That is all." "She is lying," Brennan said flatly. "She is covering for him." Caleb took a step forward, his whole body tensing. "Careful, Tom." "It is true, is it not?" Brennan's voice rose, addressing the question to the gathering crowd that had begun to form. Word had spread fast, and neighbors from nearby ranches had arrived to watch the spectacle. "You brought her here under false pretenses. Your boy forged a letter, and now she is living here like she has every right." "Like what?" Caleb's voice was quiet now, dangerous in its control. Brennan hesitated, suddenly aware that he might have pushed too far. "Like something she is not." "She is a guest," Caleb said. "Nothing more." "Then make it official," Brennan shot back. "Marry her or send her away, because what you are doing now, it is not right, and it is not decent." The words hung in the air like smoke. Eliza saw Caleb's fists clench, saw the fury in his eyes, saw him holding himself back from violence by sheer force of will. "I will not be threatened on my own land," Caleb said. Marshal Coughlin held up a hand. "Nobody is threatening anybody. But Mr. Brennan has a point. This situation looks bad. If you will not marry her, maybe the lady should move into town, stay at the hotel. That would quiet things down." Caleb turned to Eliza. Their eyes met, and in that moment she saw everything he was not saying, the fear, the exhaustion, the weight of trying to protect everyone and failing. The knowledge that this moment would define everything that came after. She could leave, should leave. It would solve everything, make it all go away, let them both move on with their lives. But Noah was standing in the doorway behind her, watching with wide, frightened eyes, and she could not let him see her run, could not let him learn that when things got hard, the right thing to do was to give up. "I will stay at the hotel," she heard herself say, "if it helps." Caleb's expression went blank, carefully neutral. "Fine." "Good," Coughlin said. "We will escort you into town." "That will not be necessary," Eliza said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I insist." Caleb stepped between them. "You will leave her alone. I will take her myself." Brennan looked like he wanted to argue, but Coughlin nodded. "Tomorrow morning, first thing." They mounted up and rode out, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in their wake. Eliza stood frozen, her heart pounding, barely able to process what had just happened. Noah came out onto the porch, his eyes wide with tears. "Why are you leaving?" "Just for a little while," Eliza said, but the words tasted like ash in her mouth. "That is what Ma said." Noah's voice broke. "And she did not come back." The words shattered something in the air. Caleb turned to his son, his face stricken. "Noah!" But the boy was already running, disappearing into the barn, his small shoulders shaking with sobs he was trying to hide. Caleb looked at Eliza, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw him completely undone. All the walls gone, all the control stripped away. Just raw pain and helplessness, and the terrible knowledge that he had failed the two people who mattered most. "I am sorry," he said. The words came out rough, barely audible. "Do not be," Eliza said. "This is not your fault." "It is. All of it." "No." She shook her head. "It is the world's fault, but we are the ones who have to live in it." She walked past him into the house and began packing her things, each item placed carefully in the carpet bag that had carried her across 1,000 miles and now would carry her the 5 miles back to town. It felt heavier now than it had when she arrived, weighted down with hope that had curdled into something bitter. That night Caleb found Noah in the barn loft, curled up in the hay with tears drying on his face. He climbed up slowly, his joints protesting, and sat beside his son in the darkness. For a long time neither of them spoke. The horses moved in their stalls below. Somewhere an owl called. The night was vast and cold and indifferent to human suffering. "She is not leaving because of you," Caleb said finally. "Yes, she is." "No, she is leaving because people will not let her stay." He paused, searching for words that would not come. "There is a difference." Noah wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I thought if she came you would be happy again." Caleb felt something crack in his chest, some last defense against the truth. "I know." "Are you mad at me?" "No." He pulled Noah close, feeling the boy's small body shake with sobs he had been holding back. "I am not mad. I am just tired. Of me. Of everything. But not you, never you." They sat together in the dark, and Caleb realized that he had been trying so hard to protect his son from pain that he had forgotten how to let him feel anything else, had forgotten that grief shared is grief, lessened that walls built to keep hurt out also keep love from getting in. In the house, Eliza lay awake on the narrow bed, listening to the wind and thinking about choices. She could leave tomorrow, go back east, start over somewhere else, find another job, another room, another life that looked like the one she had left behind. But when she closed her eyes, she saw Noah's face, saw the hope dying in his eyes when she said she was leaving, saw the way he had looked at her like she was the answer to a prayer he had been too afraid to speak out loud. And she knew that some things mattered more than safety, more than sense, more than self-preservation. When morning came, Caleb loaded her bag into the wagon without a word. Noah sat between them, silent and pale, his small hands clenched in his lap. The ride into town was the longest 5 miles Eliza had ever traveled. At the hotel, Caleb carried her bag inside and paid for a week in advance. The clerk gave them both a knowing look that made Eliza's skin crawl, a look that said he knew exactly what was happening and took satisfaction in it. Outside, Noah threw his arms around her waist and held on tight. "Do not forget me," he whispered. "Never." She promised, her voice breaking. Caleb stood apart, his hat in his hands, his face unreadable. "Thank you," Eliza said, "for everything." He nodded once. Then he climbed into the wagon, and they drove away, leaving her standing on the dusty street with her carpetbag and the ruins of something that had never quite had the chance to begin. Eliza stood there long after they disappeared from sight, watching the empty road and wondering if doing the right thing was supposed to feel this much like breaking. The hotel room was clean but lifeless. A bed, a chair, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the main street of Brewster. Eliza unpacked her few belongings and sat on the edge of the bed listening to the sounds of the town below. Wagons rattling past, voices calling to one another. The ordinary noise of people living their ordinary lives, completely unaware that her world had just collapsed. She had never felt more alone. 3 days passed in a fog of sameness. She took her meals in the hotel dining room, enduring the stares and whispers of the other guests. She walked through town with her head high, buying thread and fabric she did not need, just to have something to do, just to prove to herself and everyone watching that she would not hide. And every evening she sat by the window and watched the road that led out of town, hoping to see a familiar wagon that never came. On the 4th morning, there was a knock at her door. She opened it to find a young woman standing in the hallway, barely 20 years old, with red hair pinned loosely and a basket over her arm. "Miss Ward," the girl said, "I am Annie Cooper. I work at the Mercantile." She held out the basket. "I brought you some bread. Fresh this morning." Eliza blinked, caught off guard. "That is very kind, but I did not order any." "I know." Annie's smile was tentative but genuine. "I just thought you might like it, being new in town and all." Eliza took the basket slowly, feeling the warmth of the bread through the cloth. "Thank you." Annie hesitated, glancing nervously at the door as if afraid of being seen. "May I come in? Just for a moment?" Eliza stepped aside and the girl slipped into the room, closing the door behind her with care. "I do not mean to intrude," Annie said quickly, "but I wanted you to know that not everyone in this town thinks badly of you." "Just most of them," Eliza said. Annie winced. "It is not personal. People here, they are scared of things they do not understand. A woman traveling alone, staying with a widower, it does not fit how they think things should be. And how should things be? Safe, predictable." Annie sat in the chair by the window. "My mother died when I was 12. My father raised me and my 3 brothers on his own. People talked then too, said it was not proper, said he should remarry or send me to live with relatives." She looked down at her hands. "He did not. He kept us together, and people eventually stopped talking." "Why are you telling me this?" Eliza asked. "Because I saw what happened at the station when you arrived. I saw what happened when those men came to the ranch." Annie's voice was quiet but steady. "And I saw Noah Hart's face when his father drove away without you. That boy has been carrying the weight of his mother's death for 3 years. And when you came, I saw him smile for the first time since the funeral." Eliza felt her throat tighten. "I did not mean to make things harder for them." "You did not. The town did." Annie stood. "I just wanted you to know that some of us see what you did, staying when you could have left, helping when you did not have to. That takes courage. Or foolishness. Maybe both." Annie moved toward the door, then paused. "If you need anything, come find me at the Mercantile, and do not let them drive you away." She slipped out before Eliza could respond, leaving behind the basket of bread and the first kindness Eliza had received since arriving in Brewster. That afternoon, Eliza was walking past the church when she heard raised voices. A group of men had gathered near the town hall. Tom Brennan stood at the center, along with Marshall Coughlin and several others she did not recognize. And in the middle of them all stood Caleb, his face like carved stone. Eliza stopped, her heart hammering. She knew she should keep walking, should not draw attention to herself. But something in Caleb's posture and the tension radiating from the group made her feet root to the spot. "You cannot just ignore this, Hart," Brennan was saying, his voice carrying across the square. "The boy forged your name. That is fraud." "He is 8 years old," Caleb said evenly. "He did not understand what he was doing. He understood enough to lie. He is a child. That does not excuse it." Marshall Coughlin stepped forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Hart, the law is the law. The boy committed fraud. The woman came here under false pretenses, and you allowed her to stay under your roof without proper oversight. That is 3 violations right there." Eliza felt ice slide down her spine. She started to move closer, but a hand caught her arm. Annie had appeared out of nowhere, her face pale. "Do not," she whispered urgently. "You will only make it worse. They are punishing him for being kind. They are punishing him for breaking their rules." Annie's grip tightened. "And if you step in now, they will use it against both of you." Eliza wanted to scream, wanted to run forward and tell them all exactly what she thought of their rules and their judgment and their cruelty. But she stayed still because Annie was right. Because sometimes the only way to help was to stay silent and let others fight their own battles. Caleb's voice cut through the argument sharp as a knife. "What do you want from me?" "An acknowledgement," Coughlin said, "that what happened was wrong, that the boy acted improperly, and that you take full responsibility." "I do." "Publicly?" Caleb's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Fine." "And there is the matter of restitution," Brennan said. His voice carried a note of satisfaction that made Eliza's stomach turn. The woman traveled all this way on a false promise. She is entitled to compensation for her trouble. I already paid for her return ticket. "That is not enough." Brennan crossed his arms. "She gave up her life in Philadelphia. Lost time, lost wages, lost opportunities. You owe her more than a train ticket." Eliza felt sick. This was not about justice. This was about humiliation, about breaking Caleb Hart in front of the whole town. "How much?" Caleb asked, his voice flat. $200. The number hung in the air like a noose. Eliza knew what that meant. $200 was more than most men made in 6 months. It was the price of a good horse, a season's worth of supplies, a child's future. "I do not have that kind of money," Caleb said quietly. "Then you will work it off, or sell something." Brennan's smile was thin, cruel. "I hear you have got a good breeding mare. Sell her. That would cover the debt." Caleb went pale. Eliza saw his hands clench, saw something break behind his eyes. That horse, she realized. That horse meant something to him, something important enough that losing it would hurt almost as much as losing the money. "That horse is valuable," Caleb said. "I know." Brennan's tone was almost cheerful. "Which is why it is fair compensation." Eliza could not stay silent any longer. She pulled free from Annie and stepped forward. "Stop." Every head turned toward her. Coughlin frowned. "Ma'am, this does not concern you." "It concerns me entirely." Eliza walked straight to Caleb, ignoring the stares. "I do not want his money. I do not want his horse. I came here of my own free will, and I stayed of my own choice. He owes me nothing." "The law says otherwise," Brennan said. "Then the law is wrong." Eliza's voice was steady cold. "You want someone to punish me. I am the one who accepted the invitation. I am the one who stayed when I should have left. Mr. Hart tried to send me away. I refused." "That is not what happened," Caleb said sharply. "Is it not?" She looked at him, willing him to understand. "You offered me a return ticket the moment I arrived. You told me I could not stay. I insisted. Because Noah asked you to. Because I had nowhere else to go." She turned back to Coughlin. "If there has been any impropriety, it is mine. Not his, not the boy's. Mine." Coughlin studied her, his expression unreadable. "You are saying you manipulated the situation. I am saying I took advantage of a child's kindness and a man's honor." The lies tasted like ash, but she forced them out. "If anyone should pay restitution, it is me." "You do not have $200, Brennan said flatly. "No, but I have time." Eliza lifted her chin. "I will work it off. Whatever needs doing in this town, I will do it. But you will leave Mr. Hart and his son alone." Silence fell over the group. Caleb was staring at her like she had lost her mind. "Eliza, do not do this," he said. "It is done." She did not look at him. "Do we have an agreement, Marshal?" Coughlin glanced at Brennan, who looked deeply unsatisfied but also uncertain. The crowd that had gathered was watching, waiting. This was not the outcome anyone had expected. "What kind of work?" Coughlin asked. "Whatever you decide is fair. Cleaning, cooking, mending, washing." Eliza kept her voice level. "And I will stay in town, not at the Hart Ranch." "Agreed." Coughlin nodded slowly. "All right. We will draw up the terms. You will work off the debt at standard wages. Should take about 2 years at current rates." 2 years. It felt like a lifetime and no time at all. But Eliza just nodded. "Acceptable." Coughlin gestured to the others, and they moved toward the town hall to formalize the arrangement. Caleb grabbed Eliza's arm before she could follow. "What the hell did you just do?" His voice was low, furious. "What you could not." She pulled free. "I gave them someone to blame. You just sold yourself into servitude. I bought you your freedom." Her voice shook despite her best efforts. "You and Noah, that is all that matters. You do not owe me anything. I owe that boy everything." She finally looked at him, and her eyes were fierce. "He wrote that letter because he wanted to save you. The least I can do is make sure he does not lose you in the process." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, to rage, to tear the whole situation apart with his bare hands, but his voice came out broken. "I cannot let you do this. You cannot stop me." Eliza stepped back. "Go home, Mr. Hart. Take care of your son, and let me do what I came here to do." She turned and walked toward the town hall before he could see her cry. Behind her, Caleb stood in the street watching her go and realized that he had just watched the bravest thing he had ever seen. And it had cost him something. He was only beginning to understand he could not afford to lose. The terms were drawn up that evening in Marshal Coughlin's small office. Eliza would work off her debt through labor. Cleaning, cooking, mending, whatever the town required. She would be paid a small wage, most of which would go toward the $200. At the current rate, it would take her nearly 2 years to clear the debt. She signed without hesitation, her hand steady on the pen. Annie found her afterward sitting on the hotel steps in the dark. The girl sat down beside her without asking permission. "You are insane," Annie said. "Probably. 2 years. You just committed yourself to 2 years of servitude." "I have survived worse." Annie shook her head. "Why would you do this? For a man you barely know. For a child who is not yours." Eliza did not answer right away. She watched the stars appearing one by one in the darkening sky, bright and cold and impossibly distant. She thought about a little boy who had written a letter in secret because he did not know how else to ask for help. Thought about a man so broken by grief that he had forgotten how to hope. Thought about the life she had left behind in Philadelphia, empty and meaningless, spent in service to people who saw her as nothing more than a pair of hands to do work they did not want to do themselves. "Because someone had to," she said finally. The work started the next morning. Mrs. Brennan had drawn up a list of tasks that would have broken most women. Eliza was to clean the church every week, wash linens for the hotel, mend clothes for anyone who asked, help prepare meals for community events. The wages were minimal. The hours were long. The work was backbreaking. Eliza did it all without complaint. She scrubbed floors until her hands bled. She hauled water until her shoulders screamed. She mended torn shirts and patched worn trousers until her eyes burned from the clothes work by candlelight. And through it all, she kept her head high and her mouth shut. The town watched her with a mixture of suspicion and grudging respect. Some still whispered that she was a schemer, a woman who had gotten exactly what she deserved. But others, the ones who saw her working dawn to dusk without complaint, began to wonder if maybe they had been wrong. Annie brought her food when she forgot to eat. The hotel clerk started leaving fresh water in her room without being asked. And one morning, Eliza found a jar of salve for her raw hands sitting outside her door with no note attached. She never saw Caleb, but Noah came. He appeared one afternoon while she was hanging laundry behind the hotel, his face nervous and hopeful in equal measure. "Ma'am," he said quietly. Eliza turned, her heart lurching at the sight of him. "Noah, what are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you." He shifted from foot to foot. "Pa does not know I came." "You should not be here." "I know, but I had to tell you something." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "It is my fault. All of it. And you are paying for what I did." "Noah." Eliza set down the laundry basket and crouched in front of him, bringing herself level with his eyes. "Listen to me. What you did writing that letter, it was not wrong. It was brave. You saw your father hurting and you tried to help. That is not something to be ashamed of. But you are working like a servant because of me. I am working because this town needed someone to blame, and I was willing to be that person." She gripped his shoulders gently. "That is not your fault. That is their fault. Pa says you should not have to pay for their mistakes. Your father is right. But the world does not work the way it should." She wiped a tear from his cheek with her thumb. "Sometimes good people pay for bad rules. But I am all right. I promise. Are you coming back?" The question came out small, desperate. "Ever?" The question broke something in her chest. "I do not know." "Pa misses you." Noah's voice was urgent now, trying to convince her. "He does. He will not say it, but I can tell. He does not talk at all anymore, and at night I hear him walking around like he cannot sleep. Noah, please come back, even if it is just to visit. Please." Eliza pulled him into a hug, holding him tight against her chest. "I cannot. Not yet. But that does not mean I do not think about you. About both of you. Every day." He clung to her, his small body shaking. "I wish I never wrote that letter." "Do not say that." She pulled back, looking him in the eye. "That letter brought me here, and being here knowing you, that is the best thing that has happened to me in a long time. Do not you dare regret it." He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I have to go before Pa notices I am gone." "Be safe." He kissed her cheek, quick and shy, then ran. Eliza stood alone in the alley, watching him disappear around the corner, and let herself cry for the first time since signing the agreement. Weeks passed. The work continued. Eliza's hands grew calloused, tough as leather. Her back ached constantly. Exhaustion became a permanent state, something she carried with her like a second shadow. But she kept going. One evening, as she was carrying a load of mended clothes back to the mercantile, she heard voices coming from the alley beside the general store. She paused, not wanting to eavesdrop, but unable to move. "She cannot keep this up forever," a woman's voice said. Annie Eliza realized. "She will, though," another woman replied, younger, uncertain. "Have you seen her? She never stops." "Because she does not have a choice." Annie sounded angry. Brennan made sure of that. It was legal. Legal does not make it right. There was the sound of something being set down hard. "That woman came here looking for a new start, and we turned her into unpaid labor because we could not stand the idea that maybe Caleb Hart was not as broken as we thought he was." Silence. Then the other voice, quieter now. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we liked him better when he was suffering." Annie's voice was bitter. "When he was the tragic widower raising his son alone. It made us feel useful, bringing him casseroles and checking in on the boy. But when someone came along who might actually help, who might make him happy again, we could not have that. So we destroyed it." Eliza pressed her back against the wall, hardly breathing. She had known the town resented her presence, but hearing it spoken aloud was different. Hearing someone put words to the cruelty made it real in a way it had not been before. "It was not just us," the other woman protested weakly. "The law is what we make it," Annie said. "And we made it cruel. I am ashamed of this town, and I am ashamed I did not speak up sooner." Eliza stepped back, not wanting to be caught listening. She hurried to the mercantile, delivered the clothes, and walked back to the hotel in a daze. That night she sat at the window and stared out at the dark town, thinking about cruelty and kindness and the thin line between them. She thought about leaving, about just walking away from the debt, from the town, from all of it. But then she thought about Noah's face when he had asked her to come back, thought about the hope in his eyes, the desperate need for her to not be just another person who left him. And she knew she could not go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The breaking point came 6 weeks after the agreement was signed. Eliza was cleaning the church, sweeping the rough wooden floor and dusting the pews when she heard the door open behind her. She turned, expecting to see Reverend Michaels. Instead, she saw Caleb. He stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, looking like he had not slept in days. His eyes were shadowed, his face drawn. He looked older than he had 6 weeks ago, as if the weight of those weeks had pressed down on him until something fundamental had shifted. "Mr. Hart," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "You should not be here." "I know." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I came anyway. If someone sees you here with me, it will make things worse." "I do not care." He walked toward her slowly. "I cannot do this anymore." "Do what?" "Watch you destroy yourself for something that was not your fault." His voice was rough, strained. "You have been working yourself to death for 6 weeks. For a debt you do not owe. For a crime you did not commit. I made a choice. A choice you should not have had to make." He stopped a few feet away from her. "Eliza, this has to stop." "It will. In about 18 more months. That is not acceptable." "It is the agreement." "Then I will break it." His hands clenched on his hat. "I will go to Coughlin, tell him the truth, that you lied, that I was the one responsible." "No." The word came out sharp, hard. "You will do no such thing." "Why not?" "Because they will punish you." She set down her dust cloth. "And worse, they will punish Noah. Do you want your son to grow up being known as the boy whose father was publicly shamed? Do you want him carrying that weight?" "I want him to stop asking me every day when you are coming home." The words burst out of Caleb like something he had been holding back for too long. "I want him to stop looking at me like I broke something precious. I want to stop lying awake at night knowing that you are working yourself into the ground because I was too much of a coward to stand up for you when it mattered." Eliza turned away, her throat tight. "I am not coming home." "Why not?" "Because there is no home for me there." She forced herself to look at him. "You made that clear when you drove me into town and left me at the hotel." "I did that to protect you. You did it because it was easier than fighting for me." Her voice shook despite her best efforts. "You had a choice, Caleb. When those men came to your ranch, when they demanded you send me away, you could have told them no. You could have stood your ground, but you did not." Caleb flinched as if she had struck him. "I was trying to keep you safe." "I did not ask for safe." The words burst out of her loud in the quiet church. "I asked for a chance, a place to belong, and the moment it got difficult, you gave up." "I gave up." His voice rose to match hers. "I let them humiliate me in front of the whole town. I accepted responsibility for something my son did. I stood there and took their judgment because I thought it would spare you. And then you let me take the blame anyway. You did not give me a choice." "I gave you every choice." Eliza's hands were shaking now. "I could have left the moment you told me you did not write that letter. I could have walked away. But I stayed because I saw a little boy who needed help and a man who was drowning in grief. And I thought maybe I could matter. Just a little. Just enough to make staying worth it. You do matter." "Not enough." She wiped her eyes angrily. "Not enough for you to fight for me when it counted." Caleb stared at her, his face stricken. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing." The word came out flat, final. "I do not want anything anymore." "Eliza." "You should go." She turned back to her work, picking up the dust cloth with trembling hands. "Before someone sees you here and adds it to my debt." For a long moment he did not move. She could feel him standing there, could feel the weight of everything unspoken hanging in the air between them. Then she heard his footsteps, slow and heavy, walking toward the door. 3 days after Eliza signed the agreement, Caleb stood in the barn before dawn, his hand resting on Belle's neck. The mare nuzzled his shoulder, trusting. A memory surfaced sharp and clear. He was 25, standing in this same barn with his father. The old man had just handed him Belle's reins, her coat gleaming copper in the lamplight. A man's word and his horse. His father had said, his voice rough with age and wisdom, "That is all he has got in this world, son. Keep them both, and you will never be poor." Caleb had kept his word to Sarah, and now he was breaking his father's. He led Belle out into the pre-dawn darkness toward the trader waiting at the property line. Each step felt like betrayal, but some things he was learning mattered more than pride, more than memory, more than a promise to the dead when the living needed saving. He paused at the threshold. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "you mattered enough for me to sell Belle." Eliza's hands went still. "What?" "The mare, Belle. Brennan wanted her, said she would cover your debt." Caleb's voice was hollow. "I sold her 3 days after you signed that agreement, gave the money to Coughlin, told him to apply it to your debt." She turned slowly. "You did not." "I did. Anonymously. He does not know it came from me." Caleb met her eyes. "It will not clear the debt entirely, but it will cut the time in half, maybe less." Eliza could not breathe, could not think. "Why would you do that?" "Because I am a coward when it comes to standing up in public," Caleb said. "But I am not a coward when it comes to protecting you. And if the only way I could do that was in secret, then that is what I did." He put his hat on and walked out before she could respond, leaving her standing alone in the church with her heart hammering and her whole understanding of the past 6 weeks suddenly violently upended. That night she went to see Marshal Coughlin. He received her in his small office, looking surprised and wary. "Miss Ward, what can I do for you?" "I want to know about the payment made on my debt." Coughlin's expression went carefully blank. "What payment? Do not play games with me, Marshal." Eliza sat down without being invited. "Someone paid a significant sum toward my debt. I want to know who." "That is confidential." "Is it legal to accept anonymous payments?" "It is unusual, but not illegal." He leaned back in his chair. "Why does it matter?" "Because I want to know if I am in someone else's debt now." "You are not. The payment was made with no strings attached." He studied her. "Does it bother you that someone helped?" "It bothers me that someone felt they had to." Coughlin was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled out a ledger and opened it. "The payment cut your debt almost in half. At your current rate of work, you will be free in 9 months instead of 18. 9 months. It still felt like a lifetime, but it was better than 2 years, better than the slow, grinding punishment she had been enduring. "And after that," Eliza asked, "am I free to leave?" "You are free to do whatever you want." He closed the ledger. "But between you and me, Miss Ward, I think you have paid enough already. The town does not seem to think so, but it will. Give it time." "Do they notice that they were wrong?" Coughlin's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. "Some do. Others are too stubborn. But people are watching you, watching how hard you work, watching how you carry yourself. That matters more than you might think." Eliza stood. "Thank you, Marshal." "Miss Ward." He waited until she looked back. "For what it is worth, I think Hart made a mistake letting you go." She did not respond, just walked out into the night carrying the weight of 9 more months and the knowledge that somewhere in this town Caleb Hart had sold the thing he loved most to buy her a little bit of freedom, and she did not know whether to curse him or thank him for it. The days that followed moved like molasses in winter. Eliza worked, she ate, she slept fitfully in the narrow hotel bed. and she thought about Caleb Hart standing in that church doorway, his face hollowed out by exhaustion, and something that looked almost like desperation. He had sold Belle, his father's horse, the last tangible connection to a man who had taught him what it meant to be honorable, and he had done it for her. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. She did not know what to do with it, did not know if it changed anything or if it changed everything. 9 months, Coughlin had said. 9 more months of scrubbing floors and washing linens and mending clothes for people who looked through her like she was invisible. 9 months until she was free. Free to do what? Go back to Philadelphia. Find another town, another job, another life that looked exactly like the one she had left behind. The thought made her feel hollow. She was carrying a basket of clean linens to the hotel when she saw him again. Caleb stood near the livery stable talking to a man she did not recognize. His hat was pulled low, his shoulders tight. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in every line of his body. Their eyes met across the street. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Caleb touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgment, turned, and walked away. Eliza stood there, basket in her arms, and felt something crack open in her chest. She had told him she wanted nothing, had meant it when she said it. But watching him walk away felt like losing something she had not realized she still hoped for. That night she sat at the window of her room and made a choice. 9 months. She would work the 9 months, clear her debt, and then she would leave Brewster, go somewhere new, somewhere nobody knew her story, somewhere she could start over without the weight of this town's judgment pressing down on her shoulders. It was the sensible thing to do, the smart thing. So why did it feel like giving up 7 weeks into her servitude, everything changed? Eliza was sweeping the church steps when a stranger rode into town. He came alone on a bay gelding that looked too fine for these dusty streets. The man himself was tall, well-dressed, with the kind of groomed appearance that spoke of money and cities and a world far removed from Wyoming territory. He dismounted near the hotel and stood for a moment surveying the town with an expression of distaste. Then he walked inside, his boots clicking on the wooden boardwalk with the precise rhythm of someone who was used to being obeyed. Eliza felt a cold finger of dread trace down her spine. She did not know why, did not know this man, but something about him made her want to run. She finished sweeping and went inside the church, trying to shake the feeling of unease that had settled over her like a shroud. 2 hours later, there was a knock at her hotel room door. She opened it to find the stranger standing in the hallway, a leather satchel in one hand. Up close, he was older than she had thought. Mid-40s, with gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, but never with warmth. "Miss Eliza Ward," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." Her voice came out steady despite the fear curling in her stomach. "Can I help you?" "I am Edmund Price, attorney at law." He pulled a document from his satchel and held it out. "I believe you and I have some business to discuss." Eliza took the paper with trembling hands. It was a contract, her contract, the one she had signed 3 years ago in Philadelphia when she had been desperate enough to take any job, any wage, any terms, just to survive. "I fulfilled that contract," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "I worked 2 years." "You worked 2 years and 3 months, Price said. His smile was thin, cold. "The contract was for 3 years. You owe me 9 months. I was underpaid, overworked. The conditions were what you agreed to." He gestured to the paper. "Your signature is right there, Miss Ward. The contract is legally binding." Eliza felt the room tilt. "I have a debt here, in Brewster. I am working it off." "That is not my concern." Price's voice was pleasant, conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "You signed a contract with me first. That contract takes precedence. You have 2 options. Return to Philadelphia and complete your term of service, or pay me $100 to void the agreement. I do not have $100. Then you will come back with me." He tucked the contract away. "I have lodging arrangements for the journey. We leave tomorrow morning." "No." The word came out flat, final. Price's expression did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes, something that looked like satisfaction. "I am afraid that is not up to you. I have a writ of enforcement from the Philadelphia courts. If you refuse to comply, Marshal Coughlin will be legally obligated to arrest you and hold you until transport can be arranged." Eliza felt her blood go cold. "You cannot do this." "I can, and I will." He tipped his hat. "You have until tomorrow morning to gather your things. I suggest you do not attempt to run. There is nowhere in this territory you could hide that I could not find you." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway like the ticking of a clock counting down to something terrible. Eliza stood frozen in the doorway, the contract clutched in her hands, and felt the last of her hope drain away like water through a sieve. She went to see Marshal Coughlin. He received her in his office with the same careful neutrality he always showed, but there was something in his eyes that looked almost like pity. "Is it legal?" Eliza asked without preamble. Coughlin sighed and gestured for her to sit. "I looked at the contract. It is valid. The writ is legitimate. If you do not comply, I will have to arrest you." "For what?" "Working somewhere else. For breach of contract." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Miss Ward, I do not like this any more than you do. But the law is clear. You signed an agreement. Price has the right to enforce it. Even if the conditions were inhumane, even if I was treated like property instead of a person. That would be a matter for the courts to decide, but that takes time, money, a lawyer." He met her eyes. "Do you have any of those things?" Eliza felt tears burn behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. "No." "Then I am sorry. But unless you can pay him or find someone to vouch for you legally, you will have to go back." She stood. "How long do I have?" He said tomorrow morning, but I told him I would need 24 hours to verify the documents. That gives you until the day after tomorrow. He paused. "Miss Ward, if you are going to run now, would be the time." "I am not running." She did not know why she said it, did not know what else she could do, but running felt like admitting defeat, like letting Edmund Price win. She walked out into the afternoon sun and stood on the dusty street trying to breathe past the panic clawing at her throat. Behind her she heard footsteps. Annie appeared at her elbow, her face pale. "I heard," the girl said quietly. "The whole town heard." "Of course they did." Eliza's voice was flat, emotionless. "What are you going to do?" "I do not know." Annie gripped her arm. "There has to be something. A way out." "There is not." Eliza pulled free gently but firmly. "There is never a way out for people like me. There is just the next cage." She walked back to the hotel, climbed the stairs to her room, and sat on the edge of the bed in the gathering dark. Tomorrow Edmund Price would come for her, and she would have to choose between going back to Philadelphia or being arrested and dragged back in chains. Either way, she was leaving Brewster, leaving Noah, leaving Caleb. The thought hurt more than it should have. She did not sleep that night, just sat by the window and watched the stars wheel overhead, counting down the hours until dawn. The next morning came too fast and too slow all at once. Eliza dressed carefully, pinned her hair with shaking hands, and waited for the knock that would signal the end of everything. It came at 9 o'clock, sharp, authoritative, final. She opened the door to find Edmund Price standing in the hallway, impeccably dressed, his expression pleasant. "Miss Ward, are you ready?" "No." "Nevertheless." He gestured toward the stairs. "We have a schedule to keep." Eliza picked up her carpetbag, the same one that had carried her across 1,000 miles of track all those months ago, and followed him down the stairs. Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. Her hands were numb. Outside a crowd had gathered. It seemed the whole town had turned out to watch her be taken away. Eliza saw faces she recognized. Mrs. Brennan, her expression smug. Tom Brennan, arms crossed, satisfied. Annie, tears streaming down her face. Marshal Coughlin, his face carefully blank. Price had arranged for a wagon. It sat in the middle of the street, a driver already at the reins. "In you go," Price said, his hand on her elbow. Eliza climbed up, her movements mechanical. This was happening. This was real. In a few minutes she would be on the road to Laramie, and from there to a train that would carry her back to Philadelphia, back to Edmund Price's house, back to the cold room and the endless work and the slow, grinding misery of servitude. Price climbed up beside her. The driver took up the reins, and then a voice cut through the morning air like a knife. "Stop." Every head turned. Eliza's heart lurched. Caleb Hart stood in the middle of the street, his hat in his hands. He looked like he had ridden hard and fast. His shirt was dusty, his face unshaven. His right hand was wrapped in a bandage, fresh blood seeping through the cloth. He walked toward the wagon with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had made a decision and would not be turned from it. "Mr. Hart?" Price's voice was cool, amused. "This does not concern you." "It does." Caleb stopped a few feet from the wagon. His eyes found Eliza's, held them. "She cannot go with you." "Why not?" "Because she is spoken for." The crowd went absolutely still. Eliza felt her breath catch in her throat. Price's smile was thin, dangerous. "I have a legal contract." "Void," Caleb interrupted. "A marriage voids labor contracts. Wyoming Territorial Law Section 4, subsection 12. She is not married." "She will be." Caleb turned to Eliza. "If she will have me." Time seemed to slow. Eliza was aware of every eye on her, every held breath, every heartbeat thundering in her ears. Caleb climbed onto the back of the wagon. He dropped to one knee, wincing slightly. His bandaged hand reached for hers. "Eliza Ward," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried in the still air. "I am not a romantic man. I do not have pretty words or grand gestures. But I have a son who calls your name in his sleep. I have a house that feels empty without you in it. And I have 9 months' worth of nights where I could not sleep because I kept thinking about how I failed you when you needed me most." Eliza felt tears spill over hot against her cheeks. "I am asking you to marry me," Caleb continued, "not because I am trying to save you from him." He gestured toward Price without looking away from her. "But because I am trying to save myself from a life without you in it. You said I was not brave enough to fight for you in public. You were right. But I am standing here now in front of this whole damn town, and I am telling you that I love you, that my son loves you, that we need you. And if you will marry me, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes." The silence was absolute. Eliza looked at him, at this broken, stubborn, impossible man who had sold his father's horse to buy her freedom, who had kept his word to a dead woman for 3 years because that was the kind of man he was, who was kneeling in the dirt in front of half the town because she had asked him to be brave. "Yes," she whispered. "What?" Caleb's expression was uncertain hope, warring with disbelief. "Yes," louder this time. "I will marry you." He stood pulling her up with him and kissed her. Right there in the wagon in front of Edmund Price and Marshall Coughlin and Mrs. Brennan and the whole assembled town of Brewster, Wyoming. The crowd erupted, some cheering, some gasping, some muttering in disapproval. Edmund Price's face had gone hard as stone. "This is fraud. A marriage of convenience to avoid a legal obligation." "Is perfectly legal," Marshall Coughlin said, stepping forward. He was smiling, actually smiling. "I checked. Marriage voids labor contracts. Has since statehood. This is a sham. This is a wedding." Reverend Michaels appeared, his Bible already in his hands. "And I suggest we formalize it immediately before anyone changes their mind." Caleb helped Eliza down from the wagon. They stood together on the dusty street, and Reverend Michaels began the ceremony right there. No music, no flowers, no guests except the entire town. "Do you, Caleb Hart, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "Do you, Eliza Ward, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you man and wife. Mr. Hart, you may kiss your bride." He did, and this time the crowd actually cheered. Edmund Price climbed down from the wagon, his face a mask of rage carefully controlled. He approached Marshall Coughlin. "This is not over," he said quietly. "I think it is," Coughlin replied, his hand resting meaningfully on his sidearm. Price turned and walked toward the hotel. But Eliza saw him stop beside Tom Brennan, saw them exchange words, saw Brennan nod, and she knew with a cold certainty that settled in her bones that Edmund Price was not done with them yet. 3 days later the summons arrived. Edmund Price had filed a lawsuit in territorial court claiming fraud, conspiracy, and breach of contract. He was demanding $200 in damages plus court costs plus the return of Eliza Ward to Philadelphia to complete her contracted term. The trial was set for 1 week from the date of filing. Caleb read the summons in silence, his jaw tight. He cannot win this. He might. Eliza sat across from him at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. He has lawyers, resources. We have nothing. We have the law. The law favors men like him. Caleb set the paper down. Then we will find someone who knows how to fight him. They found Garrett Williams, a lawyer from Cheyenne who specialized in contract law. He rode into Brewster 5 days before the trial, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a leather bag full of law books. He met with them in the church, away from prying eyes. "Tell me everything," Garrett said. They did. Every detail. The original contract, the conditions in Philadelphia, the letter, the marriage. Garrett took notes in precise, careful script. When they finished, he sat back. This will not be easy. Price has precedent on his side. Marriage as a method to avoid contractual obligations can be considered fraud if it can be proven that the marriage was entered into solely for that purpose. "It was not," Caleb said. "Can you prove that?" Garrett looked between them. "The timing is suspicious. You married her the day Price arrived to enforce the contract. A judge could reasonably conclude, 'I proposed to her because I love her,'" Caleb interrupted. "Because I should have done it weeks ago. Because the thought of her leaving was more than I could stand. That is not fraud. That is just poor timing." Garrett nodded slowly. "All right. Then that is what we argue. But we will need witnesses. People who can testify that your relationship was genuine, that the marriage was not a sham." "Half the town saw me living at his ranch," Eliza said. "And the other half will testify that it was improper," Garrett countered. "We need people who will speak to the legitimacy of your feelings, your intentions." Annie volunteered immediately. So did Marshal Coughlin, surprisingly. "I saw how he looked at you," the marshal said. "That was not a man faking." The day of the trial arrived too quickly. The courtroom was packed. It seemed everyone within 50 miles had come to watch the spectacle. Judge Harrison presided, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a reputation for following the letter of the law without much concern for the spirit. Edmund Price sat at the plaintiff's table with 2 lawyers, both imported from back east. They looked expensive, confident. Garrett sat alone at the defense table, his law books stacked beside him. The trial began. Price's lawyers went first. They painted a picture of Eliza as a manipulative woman who had used a child's innocent mistake to insinuate herself into Caleb Hart's life. They called her a schemer who had deliberately created a situation where marriage would be her only escape from legal obligation. They were very good. By the time they finished, Eliza felt like she was back in Philadelphia, standing in Edmund Price's cold house, being told that she was nothing. Property. A commodity. Then it was Garrett's turn. He called Annie first. The girl walked to the stand with her head high. Under Garrett's gentle questioning, she described watching Eliza work herself to exhaustion, described the kindness she had shown to Noah, described the way Caleb looked at her when he thought no one was watching. "Did it seem like a fraud to you?" Garrett asked. "No, sir," Annie said firmly. "It seemed like 2 people who were too stubborn to admit they loved each other until circumstances forced their hand." Price's lawyers tried to discredit her, suggested she was biased because she was Eliza's friend, but Annie held firm. Next, Garrett called Marshal Coughlin. The marshal testified about the day Caleb had come to his office asking about marriage laws. "This was 2 weeks before Price showed up," Coughlin said. "He was already thinking about proposing. He just needed to work up the courage. More objections, more attempts to tear down the testimony. But Coughlin was unshakable. Then Garrett did something unexpected. He called two women Eliza had never seen before. They had come from Philadelphia, former employees of Edmund Price. Under oath they testified about the conditions in Price's house, the 18-hour days, the locked rooms, the punishments for minor infractions, the way Price preyed on desperate women, locking them into contracts they could not afford to break. Price's lawyers objected furiously. The judge allowed the testimony. Finally, Garrett called Caleb. He walked to the stand and sat down, his hat in his hands, looking more uncomfortable than Eliza had ever seen him. "Mr. Hart," Garrett began, "do you love your wife?" "Yes." "Did you marry her to void her contract with Edmund Price?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked directly at the judge. "I married her because the thought of losing her made me realize I had already lost too much in my life. My wife died 3 years ago. For 3 years I have been going through the motions, working until I was too tired to think, avoiding anything that might make me feel again. Then Eliza showed up and she made me feel, made my son laugh, made my house feel like a home. When Price tried to take her away, I realized I had been given a second chance at happiness, and I would be a fool to let it go without a fight." He paused, his voice roughening. "The timing was not ideal. I should have proposed weeks ago, months ago. But I was scared. Scared of moving on. Scared of what it meant to love someone again. Price showing up did not make me want to marry her. It just forced me to stop being a coward and do what I should have done all along." The courtroom was silent. Garrett sat down. Price's lawyers stood up. They tore into Caleb's testimony, questioned his motives, suggested he was lying to protect himself from financial ruin. Caleb took it all without flinching. When they finished, Judge Harrison called for a recess. "I will render my decision tomorrow morning." They filed out of the courtroom in silence. Eliza felt numb. She could not tell if they had won or lost. That night, Caleb held her close in the small room above the ranch house. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "we will face it together. And if he takes me away, then I will come get you." His voice was fierce. "I will burn down his house if I have to, but I will not let him keep you." Eliza wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that love and courage were enough to overcome men like Edmund Price. But she had learned long ago that the world did not work that way. As she lay awake in the darkness, she heard voices outside, creeping closer. She went to the window and saw 2 figures on horseback moving away from the barn. One of them was Tom Brennan. The other was Edmund Price, and she smelled smoke. Caleb woke to the smell of fire. For a moment he thought he was dreaming. Then he heard the horses screaming. He was out of bed and running before conscious thought caught up with instinct. Eliza was right behind him, her nightdress billowing as she flew down the stairs. The barn was burning. Not the whole barn, just the section where they kept the cattle penned overnight. Flames licked up the wooden walls, fed by something that burned too hot too fast to be an accident. Coal oil, Caleb realized. Someone had soaked the wood in coal oil. "Noah!" Eliza's scream cut through the roar of the flames. The boy appeared in the doorway of the house, eyes wide with fear. "Get the buckets!" Caleb shouted. "Start a line from the pump!" He ran to the barn. 10 head of cattle were inside, panicking, crashing against the fence. He threw open the gate and they stampeded out, 2 of them already burning, screaming in agony. Caleb grabbed a saddle blanket and beat at the flames on the nearest cow, trying to smother them. The animal went down, would not get up again. Movement at the corner of his vision. 2 men on horseback watching from the tree line. One of them was Tom Brennan. Rage, white-hot and absolute, surged through Caleb's chest. He ran for the house, for the Winchester he kept above the door. "Caleb, no!" Eliza grabbed his arm. He shook her off, grabbed the rifle, and fired a warning shot into the air. The riders wheeled their horses, started to flee. Caleb aimed for the legs of Brennan's horse, squeezed the trigger. The animal went down, throwing its rider. Brennan hit the ground hard and did not move. The other rider kept going. Caleb fired again. Missed. The man disappeared into the darkness. Caleb ran to Brennan, the rifle trained on him. The big man was groaning, trying to get up. His leg was twisted at an angle that made Caleb's stomach turn. "Stay down," Caleb ordered. Behind him, Noah and Eliza had formed a bucket line. They were dousing the flames, keeping them from spreading to the main barn. The cattle pen was lost. 2 cows were dead, but they might save the rest. Hoofbeats. Marshal Coughlin rode into the yard, followed by 3 deputies. "Someone reported shots," Coughlin said. Then he saw the fire, saw Brennan on the ground. His expression went hard. "What happened here?" "Arson," Caleb said. "Brennan and another man. They torched the cattle pen." "That is a lie," Brennan gasped. "We were just riding past—" "With coal oil." Caleb gestured to the saddlebag that had spilled open when Brennan's horse fell. Glass bottles glinted in the firelight. In the middle of the night, Coughlin dismounted. He walked to the saddlebag, pulled out one of the bottles, sniffed it. "Coal oil." He looked at Brennan. "You are under arrest. You cannot prove anything. I can prove you were on Hart's property in the middle of the night with materials used in arson." Coughlin gestured to his deputies. "Take him." They hauled Brennan to his feet. He screamed as his broken leg took weight. They loaded him onto a horse none too gently. "The other rider," Caleb said. "He headed north. We will find him." Coughlin looked at Caleb. "You recognize him?" "Too dark. But I would bet everything I own it was Edmund Price." Coughlin's mouth thinned. "I will pay him a visit in the morning." They found Price trying to leave town before dawn. He had packed his bags, settled his hotel bill, and was waiting for the stage when Coughlin arrested him. In his room they found a second set of clothes that stank of smoke, soot under his fingernails, and a signed agreement with Tom Brennan promising $500 upon successful resolution of the Hart situation. The trial resumed that morning. Judge Harrison listened to the new evidence with a face like granite. Then he called both parties before the bench. "I am ruling in favor of the defendants," he said. "The marriage between Caleb and Eliza Hart is legitimate and binding. All claims by the plaintiff are dismissed. Furthermore, Mr. Price, you are hereby ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $200 to Miss Eliza Ward for wages unlawfully withheld during her term of employment in Philadelphia." Price's face went purple. "You cannot—" "I can, and I have. You will also face criminal charges for arson and conspiracy. Marshal Coughlin, take him into custody." It was over. Eliza stood in the courtroom. Caleb's hand tight around hers and felt something break loose in her chest. Relief. Joy. The dizzy lightness of freedom after months of carrying fear like a second skin. They walked out of the courthouse into bright morning sun. Noah was waiting on the steps, bouncing on his toes with barely contained energy. "Did we win?" he asked. "We won," Caleb said. Noah threw his arms around Eliza's waist. "You are staying, really staying." "Really staying," she promised. They rode home together, the 3 of them. Noah sat between them on the wagon seat, chattering about everything and nothing. Caleb's hand found Eliza's and held at his thumb, tracing circles on her palm. When they got to the ranch, Eliza surveyed the damage from the fire. The cattle pen would need to be rebuilt. 8 cows had survived. They had lost 2, along with most of their winter hay. "We will manage," Caleb said, following her gaze. "I know." That evening they sat on the porch as the sun set. Noah was inside, supposedly doing his letters, but Eliza could hear him singing to himself, happy, light, a child again instead of a small adult carrying the weight of his father's grief. "I am sorry," Caleb said. "For what?" "For not being brave enough sooner. For letting them make you work off a debt you did not owe. For not telling you I loved you when I should have." Eliza leaned her head on his shoulder. "When should you have told me?" "The day you stood up to Mrs. Brennan. Maybe even before that." He paused. "Definitely before Edmund Price showed up." "Then I forgive you, on one condition." "What?" "Do not ever do something that stupid again. When I saw you run into that burning barn—" Her voice broke. I had to save the cattle. Damn the cattle. She turned to face him fierce. Do you understand? You matter more than the cattle, more than the ranch, more than anything. Caleb pulled her close. I cannot promise I will not do stupid things, but I can promise I will always come back to you. That will have to be enough. They sat together as the stars came out one by one bright against the vast Wyoming sky. And for the first time in 3 years, Caleb Hart felt something that had eluded him for so long he had forgotten what it felt like. Peace. Eliza Hart stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse watching 5 children work on their letters. It was not much, just a single room heated by a wood stove with rough benches and a chalkboard Caleb had built with his own hands. But it was hers. Noah sat in the front row helping a younger child with his spelling. At 9 years old, he had become her assistant teacher, patient and kind in a way that made her heart swell. Ma, he called. The word came easily now, naturally, as if he had never called her anything else. Can we show them the map? Of course. She unrolled the large map Caleb had brought back from Cheyenne. The children gathered around asking questions, pointing at places they had heard of but never seen. Eliza rested her hand on her swollen belly. 7 months along now, big enough that simple tasks had become challenging. The baby kicked strong and insistent. All right, she said. That is enough for today. Same time tomorrow. The children scattered, running out into the afternoon sun. Noah stayed behind, helping her tidy the schoolroom. Do you think it will be a girl or a boy? He asked. I do not know. Does it matter? No. Either way, I will teach them to read. He paused, suddenly serious. Do you think Ma would have liked you? Eliza's throat tightened. I hope so. She would have. Noah said it with certainty. Pa says you are like her. Strong, brave, stubborn. Your father thinks I am stubborn. He says it like it is a compliment. Eliza laughed, the sound bright in the small space. They walked back to the ranch together. The valley was green with spring growth, the cattle fattening on new grass. The barn had been rebuilt stronger than before. The house had a new porch level and solid. And in the corral, a copper-colored mare grazed her coat, gleaming in the afternoon light. Caleb had bought her 3 months ago. For our daughter, he had said, even though they did not know yet if the baby would be a girl or son, but I have a feeling. Eliza had cried, had pressed her face against the horse's neck and cried for the man who had loved her enough to sell his father's mare and then loved her enough to replace it. Now Caleb was waiting for them in the yard, dirt on his hands from planting the garden. Eliza had insisted on marigolds, a whole row of them, bright orange and yellow. For remembering, she had said, and for new beginnings. He pulled her into his arms, careful of her belly, and kissed the top of her head. How was school? Good. Noah is a natural teacher. Takes after his mother. The words hung in the air, gentle and true. Noah beamed. That night, after Noah had gone to bed, Caleb and Eliza sat on the porch. The valley spread out before them, vast and peaceful, under a sky full of stars. Do you ever regret it? Caleb asked. Coming here, staying. Never. Not even when it was hard. Especially not then. She took his hand. Hard things are what show us who we are, what we are capable of becoming. And what did you become? Yours, she said simply, and Noah's, and my own, all at once. Caleb kissed her slow and tender. I love you. I know. She smiled, but I never get tired of hearing it. Inside, Noah lay in his bed, listening to the murmur of voices on the porch. Ma and Pa, his family, whole again in a way he had not dared to hope for when he had written that letter all those months ago. He closed his eyes and smiled. The letter had not been a mistake. It had been the bravest thing he had ever done, and it had saved all 3 of them. Caleb and Eliza Hart had 4 children. Noah graduated from law school in 1905 and became the first territorial public defender in Wyoming history. The Hart Ranch still stands today, owned by the couple's great-great-grandchildren. The original marriage certificate signed in the dusty street of Brewster in 1895 hangs in the ranch house, a reminder that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves be loved. Family is not about blood, it is about who shows up when everyone else leaves, and sometimes it starts with a letter written by a lonely child who was brave enough to hope.